You get it on the.
But it's weird because when you're doing that,
Peter
there's
and
a
James
psychiatrist
are there in the same
and
location
a
when they first met
neurologist.
Jesus on earth.
And every Thanksgiving for years
It
I've
may
talked to
be,
my
that's
kids.
one of those things we just have to
I've never
ask
seen
when
a
we get to heaven.
psychiatrist
Kind of
before.
like, where did Cain get his wife from? Did Adam and Eve have a belly?
Well, the nurse practitioner said, I think your heart's dead.
I woke up like this morning about like quarter till
Anyway,
4,
Wow.
and I turned on my TV and I was on the Hillsong channel.
Okay.
Do you have cable?
No.
Read some of the cornbread, or
There's
did you eat it all?
this preacher was on there and he has this TV show. I think it's called like What Do You See?
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, and he was going through and he's taking things and sort of like, is it alive or is it dead? And then he went, and then he did spirituality, like, and it was the coolest thing. It was on again tonight at 9:30, and I'm just like, it's on at 9:30 this morning and at 9:30 again tonight, and I'm just like, I'm gonna like tape it because it's like every now and then this guy, he's like this Irish preacher, what's his name? I don't know. But it was really cool. Anyway.
Because Shannon always thought it was too big.
It's about time for us to begin this morning. We're glad that you are here with us on this cut. It's chilly. I think Fred was saying it feels like it's going to snow, and I think he's right. It's been we're definitely at the change of seasons, aren't we? I need to know. You all have more experience at this than I do. Is it time to put my lawnmower away yet? No. No. Not even close. Oh, no, that is bad news. All right. Let's open up our Bibles to the book of Revelation, chapter 17. Revelation, chapter 17. We're coming to the close of the book. It's building to the big dramatic finish. And it reminds you again, there are two keys to understanding the book of Revelation. Number one, the kind of literature that we're dealing with. It's called technically apocalyptic literature. It's very visual. It has word pictures. And so today we're going to be looking at a particularly vivid vision of this woman, the great prostitute, the harlot. And we'll compare that next week with the beautiful bride of Christ. So you really could call today's lesson a tale of two women. One of the seven angels is about to tell John about the great prostitute. That's chapter 17 and 18. And later, one of the seven angels will tell John about the bride of Christ in chapter 21. All right, let's go right into our text then. This is from the English Standard Version. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." All right, last week we looked at the seven angels, and they were given seven bowls of incense to pour out upon the earth in judgment. They came out of the presence of God. The temple is filled with smoke so that no one can enter and stop them, and they pour out the judgment on the earth. Now one of those angels, we don't know whether it was angel number 6 or number 7, comes to John and says, "I'm going to show you the great harlot." Now, who is the great harlot? She's pictured here as sitting on many waters. And remember, the waters represent the sea of humanity, the sea of humanity. So she's there in the midst of the sea of humanity. The English Standard Version says, by the waters. Some of the versions say in the waters. The little preposition there could be used as either one. I think it's on the waters if I was going to bring my own translation out. Let's keep reading. Kistemaker, who revised Hendrickson's great commentary on the book of Revelation, says the great harlot's goal is to lead people whenever possible, wherever possible, away from Christ. Hence, she is the exact opposite of the church that seeks to lead all people everywhere to Christ. Next, John explains the term many waters as, quote, the peoples and the crowds and nations and languages of the world in verse 15. They are the restless waves of humanity controlled by this vile harlot. Here's another technical term that we'll introduce today. It's called parody. Parody. And we see this played out over and over in apocalyptic literature. So we have the vile harlot compared to the beautiful bride of Christ. We're going to point this out several places where Satan is imitating the Lord. And what was it the Apostle Paul said about Satan? That he imitates the angels of light. And so we see this. It's interesting. My little sister was a bank manager, and she went and spent 3 days with the Treasury Department learning how to identify counterfeit bills. And isn't that an interesting subject? I said, Laurie, how many counterfeit bills did you handle while you were there? Tell me about the fakes. And she said, we didn't handle a single fake. Said the whole time we learned to identify the true bill, and we knew it so well that if you came across a fake, it would immediately jump out. You knew what made it authentic. And so it is as Christians. It's easy to get enamored by talking about demons and especially now that we're in Halloween and devils and all these kinds of things. But we as Christians need to focus our attention on Christ and being able to identify the truth. Likewise, one of the classes that I had back in the School of Preaching was cults and denominational doctrines was another class. And we talk about all the variations and stuff. And really, frankly, as I've gotten older, I think those are less valuable than learning what the true church is and understanding the church of the Bible. So we want to be focusing on the authentic. But keep in mind, we'll look at it again as we come across some more examples today of parody, imitations of the real thing. Continuing in the book of Revelation, chapter 17 and verse 3, and he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of the earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. Now that last phrase, marveled greatly, it's not just wow, it's terrifying. It's puzzling. It's overwhelming. He's just stunned. It's not what he was expecting. Now, we talk about this woman. She is the great seductress. That's kind of the key to this section. She is the seductress. She's pictured as beautiful. That she's wearing this gorgeous attire, the red dress. What does red represent? Remember, we sing the song, though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Scarlet is the color of sin. No offense to your coat, okay? Scarlet is the color of sin. And on top of that, she has golden threads woven through it. She has the most beautiful jewelry. We can imagine her hair, her makeup. She is so seductive. We're attracted to her. Now, we like to think that sin is ugly. But the fact of the matter is, sin is incredibly attractive. And we see it in this image. In her hand, and I can imagine she has beautiful nails, in her hands is a golden cup. Have you noticed that alcohol containers, some of the most beautiful works of glass that I've ever seen are containers for alcohol? And the goblets that are served, the crystal goblets that contain them, are so attractive. And you know, they make those drinks with layers of color and ice and umbrellas and bits of fruit. I mean, my grandmother, my grandfather's second wife, Helen, we still marvel at Helen. She was amazing. They took a trip to Florida on their vacation. And when they got down there, they went into a restaurant, and the waiter asked Helen what she'd like to drink. And she wasn't quite sure. And about that time, a fella came by with a tall, fruity drink with an umbrella and ice and all. Well, that looks right. I believe I'd like to have one of those. And she drank it, and it was really, really good. And so she asked for another one. And Helen is one of these ladies that in her purse, she has a complete Tupperware collection. And so she ordered a couple more of these fruity drinks to put in the Tupperware to take with them. And she had no idea what it was. And we're sitting around listening to Helen tell this story. And my aunt says, was it a pina colada? And Helen says, yeah, I think that's the name. It was really, really good. But you know, those Florida roads are so confusing. I mean, she and Pawpaw got stuck on the clover leaf going around and around and around trying to get on. Why? Well, they were a little inebriated. They had no, you know, it was shocking to her when she, no, it didn't have any alcohol in it. It did. It's so attractive. Now, what is in that cup? That beautiful goblet presented by this beautiful woman in gorgeous attire. What's inside of it? It's full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. We're not talking about actual sexual immorality here. We're talking spiritual immorality, spiritual infidelity, where we try to love the Lord and then there are other gods and religions or competitions that are out there. Inside this cup, well, let's go on. Kistermeyer says, the cup itself is held out to the people at large who are being seduced to drink its contents. And when they do so, they suffer disastrous results, becoming victims of pornography, gambling, extravagance, power, and the craving for celebrity status. The great prostitute occupies a central position in an anti-Christian culture. I want to think about that anti-Christian culture. Sin is seductive. If there's one thing you take away from the lesson today, sin is seductive. It's incredibly attractive. But the fruit of it. Have you been to Las Vegas? Now that is an experience. Whenever my family, when we were younger, raising my family in Southern California, and we were going back to visit the grandparents, we would drive through Las Vegas. We'd actually go a little out of our way. Why? Because it was the only place I knew where I could fill up my teenage son for a couple of bucks. You go through the lines there, and he can just eat all he wants. So we're in there eating away. And Las Vegas is so seductive. I mean, we're sitting there, the kids are there, the lights are going off, bells are ringing, people are winning money, and the kids' eyes are getting really big, going, wow, this is amazing. And I'm going, oh man, I've got to say something. I've got to teach my kids a lesson. And so I said, okay, kids, this looks really attractive, doesn't it? And I pulled out a quarter. That's when slot machines were a quarter. And I said, now, I want you to see this. It just says, put the quarter in, pull the arm, and money comes out. And they're going, yeah? And so I put the quarter in, pulled the handle, turned away, and ding, 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 ding. I hit a jackpot. and the kids are going, Dad, this is great. Thanks for teaching. No, 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 no. Well, anyway, it's so seductive. Guys, do you like to have your pockets full of change? I noticed that in Las Vegas, they don't give you folding money, they give you silver dollars. And so your pockets are full. Well, my mom and dad went to Vegas for their 25th wedding anniversary. And that seemed like a good place to go because they've got shows and food and so forth and cheap lodgings. And at the end of their trip, they're on their way to the parking garage to come home. And you need to understand, my dad was very, very conservative. I mean, we could not have real vanilla in the house because it had alcohol in it. He just, that was bad. So here they are in Vegas. And right next to the parking garage, there's the restrooms, and Mom went in to use the restroom before they took that long drive to California. And while they're there, there's a one-armed bandit right outside of the restroom. Dad's got all these silver dollars in his pocket. So nobody knows him in Vegas, right? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And so Dad, who was an elder in the church, reached in and pulled out, put in a silver dollar just to get it out of his pocket, and he hit the jackpot. Ding, 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 the lights go off and all. And it's, no! But what's he going to say if Mom comes out of the bathroom and catches him gambling? So he's just into a panic. He's picking up all of these coins, and he starts putting them back in the machine as fast as he can. He hits another jackpot. Now people have started coming all around, starting to go, oh, wow. When Mom came out of the bathroom, Dad was absolutely frantic. And she says, John, you can keep the money. It's okay. All right. Gambling, though, is a very serious problem. And it seems to really affect those who can afford to lose it the least. I'm not just talking about one-armed bandits. Do you play the lottery? Somebody's got to win. You know, the lottery is just a tax on people who are really bad at math. You know, it's so seductive. You know, it's one of those evils. It's like addictive behavior. We can talk about other kinds of sin. Nobody sets out to be a drunk. You know, nobody sets out to be an alcoholic. But it is so seductive. And the pain that it causes. Pornography. Pornography has become such a business. You know, a few years ago, Playboy magazine celebrated the victory of the sexual revolution. They were, put it on the cover of their magazine that they led the charge. And I love it that they've gone out of business. They've been put out. But I'm also sad that pornography has become such a big business. It's all over the internet, and it seduces so many people. It's become a norm. People talk about it all the time, and yet it destroys relationships. It brings about a very unhealthy picture of sex the way that God intended it, to be a loving celebration between two people who love each other. By the way, this is an adult class. There are no kids, so we can talk about some things pretty openly. And one of the things I think that we need to be sorry for is that we don't teach a more wholesome version of our sexuality. There's a book in the middle of the Old Testament called Song of Songs that is a celebration of Solomon's relationship with his first wife in the bedroom. It's an amazing, amazing text. You know, back at the close of the first century, they had bars, as it will, the ancient version of bars, and the guys would get together, get drunk, and they would sing the Song of Songs. You know, they kind of a ribald kind of a thing. And the rabbi said, no, you don't understand. It is not that. It is the relationship between the Lord and Israel that is being celebrated there. Later on, the Christians said, no, it's a celebration of the love between Christ and his bride. And one one very famous monk in the Middle Ages wrote 1,000 sermons on the Song of Songs. And frankly, he got every single one of them wrong. It really is a celebration of this joyful relationship between two people. But Satan, remember I talked about parody at the beginning? Takes something that is good and makes something sinful out of it. And so we see perversions all around us. It's part of the allure of this woman and her cup of abominations. All right, enough of that. We'll continue. Now, we left off where the Apostle John is amazed. He doesn't know what to think. The vision wasn't what he was expecting. Here's this beautiful woman with her cup of abominations, and she is drunk. You remember that? I didn't talk about this. What is she drunk on? The blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs. In this whole process, Christians are being destroyed by the culture that is around them, by the people that have become addicted to the drink that is in this woman's cup. Incidentally, do you realize that there have been more Christians martyred for their faith in the past 100 years than in the previous 19 centuries? We think about the persecutions under Nero, the persecutions under Domitian. But the fact of the matter is, we live in dangerous times. Remember just a couple years ago about the Egyptian Christians who were martyred on the beach. It's still very real. We've been praying for Billy in Miramar, and this past week he sent me pictures of the Miramar government driving tanks through the downtown streets of his little village. He and his family have had to flee into the jungle because of the persecution. These are dangerous times, and we need to open up our eyes and see that there is a spiritual war going on right now between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. We live in dangerous times. All right, back to verse 7. But the angel said to me, "Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction." Now, let's stop and think about this beast for just a minute. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to. Again, we look at parity. God was, is, and is to come. And so the language that is used to describe this beast is very, very similar. The beast was and is to come. He's coming up out of the abyss, and he is not. Well, what's the name of Jesus, or rather the name of God? You've heard Jehovah God, or you've heard the term Yahweh. Yahweh is the correct term. All right, Yahweh is the correct term. But what does that mean? When Moses asked him, "Who are you?" what did he say? I am. I am. Well, what's Satan's name? I am not. I am not. And you see how that relates together. Now, he's coming up out of the abyss. The abyss is where Satan dwells. That's his home. But he's coming out of the abyss for what? To go to destruction. All right? So we see this parody in this text. And the dwellers on earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. Now, this calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. Now, take note of that. When the text opens, it says the woman is seated on the waters. Here it says she's seated on the mountains. We'll see another place that she's seated in this whole vision. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not and is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7 and it goes to destruction. Well, since there are no questions about what this text means, we can just continue meeting. This is strange image, isn't it? The beast sits on 7 hills. What's another name for the city of Rome? The city of 7 hills. All right. There are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, and the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. They are also 7 kings. All right. Who are the kings? What's being talked about here? Well, some people have said these are the Roman emperors. The first Roman emperor was Julius Caesar. You remember your ancient history as the Republic of Rome broke into civil war and Julius Caesar is assassinated. And so we have Octavian, who becomes the Emperor Augustus. Why is Augustus famous? Augustus was the first real emperor. He reigned for 40 years. That's a long time. We kind of get used to it. Some of you may remember FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. How many times was he elected president? 4, right? And so it kind of became, is anybody else ever going to be the president? Well, can you imagine just the short time that he was president? Imagine a president who reigns for 40 years. It becomes the status quo. And so Augustus became famous for the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. He ended piracy on the Mediterranean. He built roads, and all kinds of good things were happening. And so he ushered in a new age, but it's the age of dictators. It is the age of the empire rather than the republic. He was the first. He was also the emperor when Jesus was born. All right. By the way, why did he live so long? He was asked that secret, and he said it's because he wore woolen long johns under his toga. I don't know if that'll help you to live longer, but that's what he attributed it to. Following Augustus, then, we have Tiberius. Tiberius is kind of the Prince Charles of the ancient world. He was the emperor when Jesus was crucified, but it took forever for him to become the emperor. Why? Because Augustus lived for 40 years. Will Prince Charles ever be king of England? Well, Elizabeth just keeps hanging on. So it was the similar situation in the first century, that Tiberius was just left as the crown prince, and he became bitter and was a very, very hard man. If you'd like to read more about these emperors, they really are quite fascinating. There's a couple of different sources. You can read Tacitus, the Annals of the Roman Empire. It's okay. Or you can read Suetonius, and I only tell adult audiences to read Suetonius. Suetonius wrote the lives of the 12 Caesars. You can read all about each of these men. And Suetonius, when he wrote 2 chapters on each of the emperors. One was the history of what he did and the politics that were going on. And the second chapter was kind of like the National Enquirer. It was the inside story about how perverted most of these guys were and what was going on. Suetonius, it's very, very interesting and helps you to see the world that Christianity came into and how Christianity, what we were up against. And definitely this great harlot is a very familiar character. We could go through, I could talk about each of these. Caligula was nuts. We'll just leave it at that. He wanted everyone to call him Hercules. He wore a leopard skin toga and carried a club around with him and told everybody that he was Hercules. He was the wackiest and I don't mean that in a good way, of any of these emperors. He was assassinated and replaced, well, when the royal guards killed everybody, then they realized, well, if we kill off everybody in the royal family, who's going to be the next emperor? And they looked over, and behind a curtain, they saw his feet sticking out underneath the curtain. And it was Claudius. Now, Claudius had a stutter. And that's what saved his life. Everybody thinks that when somebody has a stutter, they're kind of dull, and they thought that Claudius was an idiot. He spent all of his time in the library while everybody else is assassinating them, cousins and so forth. He hid out in the library and he learned about history and economy, and actually was a great emperor because instead of leading the army himself, he got the very best generals to lead the army. Instead of managing the economy himself, he got the very best advisors, and so he did a great job of being the emperor. The problem was his choice of women. And his third wife, Agrippina, was the mother of Nero, and she wanted her son to be the emperor, so she had a jar of poison mushrooms. If you ever are invited to a Roman feast, don't eat the mushrooms. And she assassinated Claudius, and her son Nero became the next emperor. He was just a kid. This isn't a class on the emperors, but they are so fascinating. Maybe one of these days we'll talk about each of them. Nero committed suicide with a little help from his friends. He was surrounded. They were going to kill him. He spent all night with a soliloquy with this dagger, and finally people got tired of listening to him talk, and they just helped him along with the dagger, and he died. Who's going to be the emperor next? There's nobody left in the line of succession, and so you have the Roman generals who begin to take his place. We have the year of the four emperors, 68 to 69. Nero dies, and Galba takes his place. He reigns for 6 months, and he's killed by Otho. Otho was an interesting guy. Otho had a thing about body hair. He had all the hair on his body plucked off. He was the original waxer, and he was wacko. But he didn't last very long, just January to April, 4 months, followed by Vitellius, who reigned a little bit longer, who in turn was assassinated by Vespasian. Now, we recognize Vespasian because he was the general who destroyed Israel. The first Jewish revolt from 66 to 70 AD, and you see he became the emperor before 70. He left the destruction of Jerusalem to his son Titus, who was the emperor after him, and he went back to Rome and did a really remarkable job of bringing the empire out of the shambles that it had been left in by Nero and putting it on a solid footing again. He never really took himself too seriously. If you look at the royal portraits, which are, the royal portraits are supposed to be flattering, it always looks like he's having indigestion. He's got that grimace on his face. He was an interesting character. His son Titus became the next emperor, but Titus was assassinated by his brother Domitian, who is the emperor during the time that the Apostle John is writing the book of Revelation. All right? So we'll just skip through that. But now wait a minute. We're trying to solve the riddle of the 7 kings. Who are the 7 kings? Some people said it's the emperors, but there are 12 emperors. Well, if we don't count Julius Caesar, because he didn't really reign as the emperor, he was assassinated, and we dismiss the Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, that's 4 from 12, that's still 8. So you have a problem as you try to mesh these guys up. I do not believe that the Roman emperors are the kings that are talked about in the book of Revelation. Instead, I think we're probably talking about kingdoms. Kingdoms. And if you look at it, we have the Babylonian kingdom, followed by the Assyrians, the Neo-Babylonians, Medo-Persians, the Greco-Macedonians, that's Alexander the Great, the Romans would be number 6, and one that has not yet come. And this last of the 7 kings, or 7 kingdoms that is mentioned here, says he'll only be a short while. But again, you have to take time, is very, very fluid in the book of Revelation. And it really describes this whole period from Domitian until Christ comes again. And the kingdoms was the kingdom of this earth that is being talked about. Is that clear? We'll teach this again in a couple of years, all right? We'll give you some time to think about it. Now let's go back to our text. In chapter 17, verse 12. And the 10 horns that you saw, or again, remember, horns represent power, are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. In other words, the saints. What John is doing is he's setting us up for the next couple of chapters where we have this great battle between the forces of darkness and the forces of light. And it's a very quick battle. You'll see that next week. And the angel said to me, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. All right, we'll come back here. What this passage is telling us is that God is in control. It seems like we have this beast, we have these kings, we have all of this stuff that is going on. It seems like, well, where is God in the midst of all of this? And we are told that this is all part of God's eternal plan. The highlighting of the differences between darkness and light, and God is still in control. Now, there are 2 cities that are mentioned in the book of Revelation. Again, I'm talking about parodies. And so the first one is the New Jerusalem. And the city, when you think of a city, you think of the people. If I mention a New Yorker, or a Californian, you've got this image. Well, in the residents of the New Jerusalem, this is the city of God. And the book of Revelation will close with the picture of the city of God and the New Jerusalem. And we want to be a part of what this city is. We are citizens of the New Jerusalem. But we also have this contrast. Again, the parody is the Babylon the Great. Now, Babylon in the Old Testament, this is the kingdom that destroyed Israel and carried away the Jews into captivity. And Babylon is this great city. You've heard of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. All that is associated with it seems glorious, and yet it is full of evil. Why? Because it's not devoted to the Lord. It's devoted to the moon god. And we have this evil city. So we actually have 2 worlds today. You're either a citizen of the New Jerusalem or you're a citizen of Babylon the Great. We come now to chapter 18. Chapter 18 is a series of songs, and it won't take us long to get through this. After this, I saw another angel. The previous angel was one of the 7 who had poured out the incense, the fire, the punishment on the earth. So this may be angel 6 or angel 7, we're not sure, but it's one of those angels. And after this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority. And the earth was made bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She's become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. For all nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. And then I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double portion for her in the cup she has mixed. I want to stop for just a second. This has always been a challenge for Christians. What is our relationship to the community? Sometimes Christians will go away into monasteries and build walls around them to keep the world out. Is that what we're being told to do here? Come out of her, my people? Or does it mean that we are to leave behind all of her temptations, that cup of poison that's being passed around, that come out of her, my people? We are to be different from the world. Remember, we're called saints. What does saint mean? Holy. That means that we are different, that we are separated, that we are special. And we need to act that. We need to be careful that we're not seduced by the culture, that we learn to excuse what people are doing around us, that we're not offended by the things that we see on TV, the movies, or that we read. We need to be different. We need to remember that we are a holy priesthood. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning. Since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, and mourning I shall never see. For this reason her plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire, for mighty is the Lord God who has judged her. She is not a good person. What is she drunk on? The blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs. What is her task? Although she is gorgeous, she is not gorgeous. Her task is to seduce the world. And look at all of the pain and evil that she has brought on the world. Think about the consequences of sin. Drugs, alcohol, pornography, gambling, all of these sins. What is the result of them? There's been horror brought upon the world. And so, yes, Lord, punish her. Take her away. Purify the world. And the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, Alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore. Cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, and all kinds of scented wood, all kinds of articles of ivory, all kinds of articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble. Alas, alas, for the great city that was clothed in fine linen, in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, with jewels, and with pearls. For in a single hour all this wealth has been laid waste. All the shipmasters and seafaring men, sailors, and all those whose trade is on the sea, stood far off and cried out as they saw the smoke of her burning, What city was like the great city? And they threw dust on their heads as they wept and mourned, crying out, Alas, alas, for the great city, where all who had ships at sea grew rich by her wealth. For in a single hour she's been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has given judgment for you against her. And then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, So will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will be found no more. And the sound of harpists and musicians, of flute players and trumpeters will be heard in you no more, and a craftsman of any credit will be found in you no more, and the sound of the mill will be heard in you no more, and the light of a lamp will shine in you no more, and the voice of bridegroom and bride will be heard in you no more. For your merchants were the great ones of the earth, and all nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all who have been slain on earth. Whew. Come through a lot this morning. Yeah, and we've got 60 seconds to spare. So pat yourself on the back. the thing to remember is that sin is seductive, and we need to learn to tell the difference between right and wrong and truly be the saints, the people of God, because there is a great day coming. Thank you for being here this morning. Let's take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back at the top of the hour for worship.